I was born son of a real war hero. I'm no hero. Okay, I think that label is tossed around lightly these days. The only heroes are the ones that didn't make it back, as far as I'm concerned. But my dad was genuinely a combat hero. He fought extensively in World War II. Landed under Patton during the first D-Day in North Africa. Fought through North Africa, Kasserine Pass, on to Sicily, then landed south of France, and then on through door-to-door combat in Nuremberg, long before there was ever a Nuremberg trial. And then on to Korea when that started up. He was the tip of the spear in Busan, fought the North Koreans all the way back up, met up with MacArthur at the Incheon landing, and then it was on to the Battle of Seoul, and then eventually across into China. He was also part of the 3rd ID battalion that came back out with the 7th Marines from Chosin. So, and I used to ask him all the time what was probably the worst situations he'd ever been in, and right off the bat he would always say Chosin. He went on into law enforcement. That's a picture of me sitting on my mother's lap. That's my father behind me. It's my grandfather beside him. My sister is sitting on the lap with my grandmother, his mother, Mame. She was, I can't put in human words what she was, but absolute angel on earth. She was everything to me. But I was born in the same hospital room of the same hospital as him in New Britain, Connecticut, back in the 50s. Raised in the tenements of New Britain, ended up growing up in the tenements of South Boston, so I'm a Southie. That's a picture of me in my very first sailor suit, and that's the tenements of New Britain, Connecticut. Well, we left Massachusetts, Boston, and on to other suburb areas. We left there pretty much after JFK was assassinated, pretty much right after that, and we drove cross country. That's how I ended up in Oregon. The original plan was to move to California, but that lasted about a day. We ended up in Portland, and that's where my mother's from. Is from Portland. In fact, her parents worked in the naval shipyards of Portland during World War II. She used to tell me the stories of her as a teenager when the air raid sirens would go on and the whole city would go black, and then she would say, that's when the fun began. I ended up going into the service at 17. I just completed my junior year of high school, so I never graduated. I ended up at the AFE station in Portland, and then they put us on barred windows, the buses with barred windows, and shipped us off to boot camp. Our very first night at boot camp, 4 guys couldn't take it, and they jumped the fence, except they jumped the fence over into the Marine boot camp, where they got a real working over. They were gone, discharged. So then I ended up going from there. I didn't have a rating. Everybody in the Navy becomes something, a specialist of some sort, a hull tech or a boiler tech or a radioman, signalman, whatever. I was nothing. I was just a grunt. So I ended up having, after everybody left from boot camp, I ended up doing a few extra weeks of infantry training. And so right after that, that was my MOS, was infantry and gun crews. So I ended up at a little island called Phu Quoc off the coast of South Vietnam. And our job was to, because it was basically Vietnam was drawing down, our new enemy, we always had to have one, was going to be Pol Pot from Cambodia, which was just north of us. And our job was to retrofit and salvage all the PBRs, get them running and turn them over, basically build a navy for the South Vietnamese, the ARVN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. So yeah, I spent a few months there, actually berthed on a old rusty barge, what they called an APL. And luckily I was only there a few months. They were looking for volunteers for the submarine service. So I immediately raised my hands, and you know, it's crazy because that's one of the first things you learn in the military is, yeah, don't volunteer for anything. But yeah, I was more than happy to leave being an honorary river rat. My hands, my salute to those guys over there. I lost a couple of good friends. But it was time to move on, and I instantly volunteered for submarine duty. And so they sent me back from that place to back to Connecticut, where I was born, the Navy Submarine School in Groton, Connecticut, where we had to learn everything. It was quite an intensive school. We had to learn everything from engineering, nuclear power, propulsion, high pressure hydraulics, you know, your auxiliary mechanics, everything having to do with the ship. I never knew that at the time, but on the submarine, you have to know every system, and I mean intimately. But there at the school, there were a few ways to weed out the people that wouldn't make it. And one of them was the tower. And this is where they drew cold salt water, seawater right there from the docks, and they would, to fill this tower, where you had a pressure chamber, and it kind of reminded me of these propane tanks you see at gas stations, only about 4 or 5 times as big. And they would cram about 20 of us into that in our skivvies. And then they would pressurize us down to a couple of 100 feet, maybe a few 100 feet. And sooner or later, somebody would start screaming, or their ears would start bleeding, and that would stop. And then they would depressurize us back up to the surface, and that would be really cold. It was hot being pressurized, and then when they depressurized us, it was very cold. And then they would open up the hatch, they'd grab that person, they were gone. No submarine service for them. And they would whittle it, they would cram about 20 of us into that pressure chamber. That's a picture of a new one. Ours was much older and cruder than that. We didn't have any oxygen masks or anything like that. And they would whittle that 20 down to, I don't know, 5, 8, 10 or so. That's a stanky hood that we had to wear. This is when we got done being pressurized, and we got through that little bit of torture that just kept going and going. Then they would stick us in an actual escape hatch, escape pod, where we would be pressurized, and we'd put on this inflatable stanky hood, and it gave us just enough air to get to the surface. It was actually very cold. The water was very cold. It was quite dark, and the divers would, once we were pressurized down that, the hatch would just open, and then we'd come out one at a time. They'd whip us around every which way, and they'd tell us what to do. And the thing they were doing then was they would have us say, ho, ho, ho. If you said ho, 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 they'd let you go. Okay, find your way to the surface. And that was to keep your lungs from literally expanding to the point of blowing up. So, because all the air you had was in that stanky hood. And this was part of submarine rescue. Everybody had to learn how to survive a sunken submarine, which in the end, I mean, once I got to a submarine and figured out how deep they went, I mean, that would have been fruitless. But yeah, once you got to the surface, it was a very exhilarating feeling, passing that portion of it. This is where a lot of men failed, was in pressurization and in going through the escape procedure, the submarine escape procedure. in the old tower. That old tower doesn't exist anymore. It's a new modern facility. Ours was very crude, very dark, very cold. I preferred it that way. The plunger, simply put, was the most highly decorated submarine in the whole Pacific Theater, the whole Pacific Fleet and beyond. There was no submarine that came close. So we were awarded quite often, and so I have my fruit salad. I was just a grunt. I only did one hitch, but we were awarded quite often. It didn't really mean anything to me back then. I was just young, and I thought I had other important things to do those days. But now they mean a lot to me, and one of them for sure is my submarine dolphins. And once this gets pinned on your chest, it never leaves you. It's one of the three major warfare insignia that's worn in the Navy. One is air, the other one is basically surface, and that could include surface warfare or the Poseidon of SEALs UDT, which we work closely with. But the other one is submerged, and that's the submarine service. And when you get this pinned on your chest, you actually have a designation after your name and rank, which nobody else gets that I know of anywhere in the Navy. And it's an SS in parentheses. It means submarine specialist. Some people believe it means silent service. But to have that extra designation after your name and rank for life is something special. And I just wanted to share that. This is a set of submarine dolphins, and they're forever mine. I belong to a very tight-knit brotherhood, and I'm very proud of that. There's a long storied history of the plunger. Ships in the Navy typically are made in classes, and those classes are anywhere from 2 to more vessels. At least if there's 2, one will go to the Atlantic Fleet, one will go to the Pacific Fleet. Our sister ship was a Thresher, which went down off of Cape Cod. All 129 sailors lost their lives. Fair winds and following seas, my brothers. And there's usually a few siblings too in that class. The other one was a Scorpion, which also went down in the Atlantic off the Azores. 99 more, my brothers. At any rate, there are also generations. So the first plunger was actually the reason why all submariners get hazardous duty pay to this day, because Theodore Roosevelt went on board shortly after it was commissioned, and they dove to the bottom of I believe it was Long Island Sound. And he was so affected by that when he came up, he immediately passed an executive order giving submarine sailors $1 per dive extra on top of their pay, which turned into, eventually it became hazardous duty pay, just like combat pay. I believe I got an extra $60 a month for submarine duty, non-taxable, on top of my $98 a month regular pay. So I was rich. But our submarine received several naval unit commendations, quite a few meritorious unit citations. We had quite a few battle excellence awards. We were known as the big dog, even though we were the smallest submarine around. Going to a submarine, by the time I actually reported to the submarine, I think I was just a little over, maybe 17 years, 4 months. I was still quite young and quite impressionable. I wasn't even an E3 seaman yet. And when I reported on board, I actually had to fly military transport and meet the boat in Guam in a secret little cove. We never moored beside all the other Navy ships. We were always off on our own. But yeah, and it was like I'd been dropped into an old black and white pirate movie, where they, I don't know, when I first reported on board the boat, you know, I came across the brow, I popped tall, I saluted, you know, Seaman Apprentice Carrier reporting for duty, sir, you know, and the lieutenant just kind of wiped his hand and he reached out and, hi, I'm Jimmy. I had never seen anything like that in the military. I mean, it was so lax. It was a totally different world. And he advised me to go up this jungle path to a ship's party. And I wanted to just get situated where I wanted to get assigned to rack, get ready to get underway. And he strongly suggested that I go to the ship's party. I went up the trail. It was a grass thatch hut, and what I walked into looked like something straight out of a pirate movie. They were all very rowdy, from the old man, meaning our commanding officer, right on down to the lowest. Everybody fought together and everybody played together. We were a very tight-knit crack unit. But anyway, went underway. Everybody has to mess crank or mess deck for the first 3 months, up to a certain rank, probably E5, E6. Our ship complement was 120 men, but I never saw more than 80 or 90 on board. We were headed first thing in the morning, 0 dark 30, off to the Sea of Okhotsk to do our spy thing. And I was mess decking. And at the time, you have to qualify in submarines. So, and that's learning every system intimately. I mean, exactly. Be able to draw the schematic of every system. I don't care if it's nuclear power, or whether it's comm and sonar, or whether it's high pressure hydraulics, or fire control systems, doesn't matter. You better be able to draw that schematic of that system, complete with labeling all the valves and breakers and everything from memory. And that's something that usually takes about 12 to 18 years. I'm proud to say I did it in 4.5 months. I'm extremely proud of that. But at any rate, we were out in the Sea of Okhotsk, and they assigned me a sea daddy to help me get through this qualification process. And I was mess decking at the time, and we were on total rig for silent. So there was no wearing shoes. Everybody had to whisper. There was no cooked meals, cold cuts, that sort of thing. Anyway, that's a picture of me celebrating my 18th birthday. So I was, and it was my weapons officer's birthday also. So they actually celebrated on his day. I was just a lowly grunt. So took a break from serving everybody their chow to hold a cake. But at any rate, the sea daddy I had during that mission, while I was cleaning up in the mess decks, he probably had been down this one set of ladders from the control room thousands of times, and he somehow fell, and he died right there on the spot. And went across, stepped. I checked him, ready to give first aid, but he was clearly dead. And I stepped around him and went to the stateroom, the old man's stateroom, and told him what had just happened. And at any rate, he requested permission to abort the mission. That was denied. He came back and he told us, okay, let's get some garbage bags, and over the head, over the foot, duct tape them around the middle, and stick them in that meat locker that you can see behind me in that picture. And that's how that particular mission went. But there were other things that he liked to do, and one of them was he liked to go down to, he really pushed that boat to the limits. And he liked to go down to crush depth, or as close as he could get to crush depth as he could. So we were always well past test depth all the time. And then he would like to do a main ballast tank blow, and we would drive the submarine, and full rise on the planes, all ahead flank, and then he'd like to jump out of the water like a rocket blasting off. And when you're going down to getting close to crush depth, the actual hull starts cracking and banging, exploding literally, like guns going off all around you. And to the point where the whole submarine would actually get compacted within, I don't know, it would easily compact down at least a foot or two in diameter. So that was a real unnerving thing to see. But there was one guy that was a little older than me, and he, I guess he had that one too many times, and he cracked. So we got to the surface, and there was actually a helo that came by and picked him up, in a basket, and took him back to the subtender, and we went about our way. But we came back into port, and we were moored to that tender, and I heard a ruckus way up high in the top deck of the subtender, and it was actually him escaping from the sick bay, and they were trying to stop him, and he climbed up the rail, and he jumped, and he did in a medical robe, did a perfect swan dive and cleared all the way past, right over me, over the submarine. I was at topside watch again, and he started swimming out to sea, and a couple of gunboats came by and fished him out of the water. That was the last I saw of him. But there's immense pressure on the submarine, mentally, physically, emotionally. Immense pressure can burst pipes, it can crush submarines, but immense pressure can make diamonds. And I think it's how we apply pressure as to what really matters. Yeah. Actually, submariners, first of all, we ate better than anybody. I'll never forget our cook, Smitty. Wow, amazing cook. We ate very, very well, except when we were on secret, highly classified missions, and we were rigged for silent. Then it was soup, maybe, usually just cold cuts, anything that didn't involve pots and pans. But when we were ashore, when we were back on our base at Ballast Point, Point Loma, San Diego, it was our secret little base, and we had our little detachment of UDT and SEALs there, and I believe 4 or 6 submarines. It was called Submarine Squadron 3. Subron 3 is what we were. And part of the bigger picture was Expeditionary Force 3. So we ended up back in Southeast Vietnam. But Southeast Asia. We lived in a hotel-type structure there. It was grand. I'd never seen anything like that in the military anywhere, and I'd been to many bases. But when we were out at sea, quarters were very cramped. Most of the guys of the lower ranks, if you weren't an officer or chief or extremely senior first-class petty officer of some sort, everybody hot-racked. The bunks were a lot like a sleeper car on a train, stacked 3 high with curtains you draw shut, but you shared those bunks with people. I was the lowest ranked person on that submarine, and I never hot-racked with anybody. My bunk was actually a pile of scrap metal with about a 3-inch foam pad over that, between some Mark 48 torpedoes with some sub-rocks over me. It was just an opening, a spare opening between torpedoes in the torpedo room, and that's where I slept. That happened to be where Social Central was too. That's where everybody strummed their guitars, talked, visited, studied, watched movies, whatever. So, did my best. Maybe a towel over the opening, whatever it takes. You find a way. The commanding officer, to me, was the old man. He was literally my second father. I was blessed to be part of that crack unit. I came on board, I was clearly much younger than everybody else. it's almost like he took me under his wing, and allowed me to do things that others my age or my rank was not an option for them. I actually, in this case, this photo, I was actually up in the conning tower with the old man, and we were heading out of San Diego, heading up north along the California coast, and as we were heading north, we had the Catalina Islands to port and the Southern California coast to starboard, and heading north, and like Malibu or whatever, Los Angeles. And we're heading north, and it was a beautiful sunny day. It was like 85 degrees, not a cloud in the sky. We're all ahead flank on the surface, so the water is coming over the bow and coming about halfway up the tower, the control tower, what they call the fare tower, where the fare planes were. And we actually had a whole pod of orcas and a whole school of dolphins. I remember at the time thinking, well, they think we're mom. And they're jumping over the bow, and they're making their sounds, they're talking, they're cackling away, and just having a generally good time. They're doing flips and everything, and I was just, I was mesmerized by that. And I thought, here I was, finally, I was an honest to goodness, genuine sailor. I felt like a sailor, and I realized at that moment, that that bond that sailors for centuries have had with the sea. I was glassing marks, meaning I had the field glasses, and I was calling out any other vessels in the area, any marks, any things that could possibly get in our way or be a threat. It was practice, and he was teaching me how to glass marks, and it's like fishing trawler at 270 degrees, 5,000 meters or whatever. But anyway, I got mesmerized with watching this sea mammal display in front of me, and he turned to me and he said, "You know what, Zit? We're modern day pirates, and we sail the most powerful combat vessel on earth." And that really hit me. He was absolutely correct. We were invincible. There was absolutely nothing on earth that could stop us. And that had been proven over and over and over again with all our commendations and all the operations and exercises we'd been through, the top secret operations. Nothing could match us. And it was just a perfect moment. It was a perfect moment. And I'll never forget it. I've had the HD video right up here in my head. And all I can do is smile. It made everything else that I worked hard for in the military, it made it all worth it. When I left the Navy, things were tough economically in this country. There wasn't a lot of work. And being a veteran of that era wasn't real popular. It was tough to find work. And I'll never forget one day I was pretty desperate, and I was back in Eugene, Oregon, and I walked into this company. It was a termite dry rot repair. And he looked at my application and he says, "Well, I see there's a a big blank in this particular, all these years here. What were you doing then?" And I was in the military, I was in the Navy. And he said, okay. And he said, I don't see a diploma here. And I said, well, I quit after my junior year, and I went to serve my country. And he said, well, if I were to hire you, I'd really like to see a diploma. I said, well, how can I do that? I can't now, He said, well, I'll accept a GED. I didn't even know what a GED was, he told me. And back when I was in high school, I was already taking a couple of my classes at Lane Community College in computers. So that was the thing of the future when I was a kid in high school. And so I was actually taking a computer class over at Lane Community College. Back in the days, they had data punch cards. So I found out I could go over there and I could get my GED. And so I went over to, well, first I said, so if I get this GED, will you hire me? He said, absolutely. So I went over to Lane Community College. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning. I think it was $5. They gave us 4 tests, about 3 hours worth of testing. I passed quickly. I said, can I have something that shows that I passed? I think it was math, science, English literature, and something else. And so I did. I passed after a few hours. And they gave me something, showed the test scores for every subject. And I raced back over that. I think it was around lunchtime. And I went back and put it on his desk. And I said, so you told me you'd hire me if I got a GED. And he was he was rather surprised. He said, well, yeah, okay, you're hired. So I don't think he ever had anybody do that, but I was hungry. Later on, I left Oregon and pushed on up to Alaska. That's where I grew my family. I built a fishing lodge. All my children, I made sure they learned how to hunt, fish, live off the land. It was great. Alaska was very healing. I spent several decades there. My children could literally outfish any man I knew, with the exception of me, of course. But one of them went on to be a Marine. She told me one day that she wanted to be a Marine sniper, and I begged her not to. She ended up in Iraq. But she ended up marrying a Marine sniper. But she now she has her own business in Alaska, and she's doing well. All my children have their own businesses, their own homes. That's Nathan. He's Special Forces. He's still serving. He's what they call a lifer. He'll do a complete, that's his career. So we're very proud of him. But all the children have done well. I have a son-in-law that runs, he's a fire lieutenant for Station 7 in Portland. And right after 9/11, he actually took his little crew from Station 7. He knew a legendary firefighter in New York named Billy Quick, and they'd always kept in touch. And somehow we worked out a way to get to Ground Zero. And so on September 12th, I don't know if there was even another single aircraft in the air. Everything was grounded. But my son-in-law and his squad took off to Ground Zero with a fighter escort, and they stayed there for 3 weeks. First it was rescue and recovery, and then it was, after that was not a possibility anymore. Then it was, clear the area out. So, but at any rate, President Bush found out about that, and he actually came out to Portland, Oregon with his tight security. There's actually a picture. You can see security off in the distance on a rooftop, and that's my son-in-law and his crew with some Red Cross workers. George Bush wanted to meet this fire lieutenant and his merry band of firefighters from Portland, Oregon, who came to Ground Zero to help, and somehow managed to actually get permission to fly that day. So he flew out to meet them, And then he was off and gone again. But he wanted to thank my son-in-law. You know, there's something to be said for leadership and success and teamwork. I learned the ultimate in teamwork. And you don't get there without lots of hard work, lots of dedication. We have a creed in the military. Duty, honor, God, country. I would like every Raven to get their own creed, whether it's that creed or their own. And there's lots of things that go into that creed. There's ambition, desire, determination, discipline. Learn to problem solve. Learn that I needs to be part of a team. Add in loyalty, courage, integrity. And now you're starting to get the idea of leadership. And once you get to leadership, then you're going to see success. And success is simple. Not easy, but it is simple. It's simply preparedness meeting opportunity. Well, that preparedness comes at a cost. A lot of sacrifice, a lot of hard work. And that's where you're all headed. And I'm just happy to be part of it. I've learned a lot about sacrifice. We all start off with small sacrifices, and sometimes they become ultimate sacrifices. And ask your parents. They've learned how to sacrifice on an hourly basis. And you all too will soon learn, if you haven't already experienced it. I'm sure you've already experienced the beginnings of sacrifice, but sacrifice is huge. And there will be much sacrifice in your life. But with this sacrifice comes reward. And I think I'm being rewarded now.